We'll get started. We're going to go through quite a bit of material tonight. It's a little bit of a data dump, but I think it'll all come together at the end. So thanks for joining, and let's get started. So we're going to be talking about two major things. One of them is assessing where you might get aid, and the other is deciding what you can afford. And where you might get aid is really a question of your student, but deciding what you can afford is typically a question for the parents. Where you might get aid involves understanding the student's profile in terms of potential eligibility for need or merit-based aid, or sometimes both, and importantly, understanding how colleges award aid so that you can find a college whose awarding approach is going to match the student's profile. Deciding what you can afford is making sure that you understand the true net price of a degree. That's the true cost of college. The resources that you have to pay the cost, and that's typically savings and money that you can pay from income. If that's not enough, understanding how much you have to borrow, and really importantly, whether any amount that's borrowed is going to be a reasonable amount that can be repaid after college. So we'll talk about all of those things over the course of the evening. When most people think about the cost of college, they tend to focus on the sticker price or the starting cost. So at USM, that's about $25,000 a year. At UNE, it's 61. At Bowdoin, it's 81. And at BC, it's about $84,000. But it turns out that colleges award quite a bit of gift aid that actually reduces the cost of college. So when you look at the cost after gift aid for students who've received aid, that's about $12,000 a year at USM, about $39,000 at UNE, $23,000 at Bowdoin, and about $33,000 at Boston College. But not every student receives aid. So if you just go by the net price for aided students, you're missing out on potentially a significant portion of the student population. So at USM, 91% of the students receive some type of gift aid. But at Bowdoin, only 52% do. That means that 48% of the students at Bowdoin are paying that full $81,000 a year price. And at BC, 58% of the students are paying that full $84,000 a year price. So when you consider the true net price after factoring in all students, those who receive aid and those who don't, the true net price for all students is about $13,000 on average at USM, $39,000 at UNE, 51,000 at Bowdoin, and 62,000 at Boston College. So the point of all this is to remind you, it really doesn't matter what colleges charge. What matters is what you pay. And what you pay is your net price. That's the college's cost of attendance minus the gift aid that your student might receive. And that net price is going to be different for every student at every college. So there are two main categories of financial aid. One of them is what we've been just talking about, gift aid. This is free money that truly reduces the cost of college. If it's based on economic resources of the family, it's typically called a grant. If it's based on the student's academic record, it's typically called a scholarship. And that broad term is merit-based aid. The other category of financial aid is self-help. And this doesn't reduce the cost of college, but it helps to manage it. So one type of self-help is work study. That's a job that the student gets during the academic year. And the other type is loans, money that you borrow to pay for college, but it has to be repaid after college with interest. So when you look at financial aid in these two categories, it's pretty clear that gift aid is far more valuable than self-help. Unfortunately, colleges don't always make it easy to understand that. So this is a typical award letter in which a college is letting a student know how much financial aid that student is going to get for the coming academic year. And if you look at the bottom line, it's $22,000. Well, that's a lot of money. But out of the 7 line items on this award letter, 4 of them are gift aid, 2 of them are loans, and 1 of them is work study. So looking at the various subtotals of those 3 types of aid, it turns out that the gift aid is about $15,000, loans are $5,500, and work study is about $1,800. Now, $15,000 is still a lot of money, but it's not nearly as much as $22,000. And there's some important information that's missing, specifically the list price or the starting cost and the net price, the result of subtracting the gift aid from that starting cost. I went online for this college and I looked those numbers up, and the starting cost was a little under $50,000 per year. When you subtract $15,000 in gift aid, it turns out that the net price, the starting cost minus the gift aid, is $34,865 for this student for 1 year at this college. So keep that number in mind. We're going to come back to it toward the end of the presentation. But first, let's talk about the various types of gift aid. So we said that there are 2 categories of gift aid. One of them is need-based aid, which is typically called a grant. And when most people think about financial aid, this is probably what they are traditionally thinking about. It's based on things like family income and assets. You apply for gift aid at all U.S. colleges using the FAFSA. So the FAFSA is required for gift aid and for federal student loans at all U.S. colleges. In addition to the FAFSA, many colleges require a second financial aid application called the CSS Profile, and they use that to award college-funded gift aid to students at those colleges. There are about 150 colleges that use the profile. That's out of over 2,000 four-year colleges in the US. So it's a minority of the colleges, but they tend to be the colleges that are the most well-known and the ones that are the most generous with need-based aid. So as you go through the financial aid process, there's a good chance that you're going to encounter the CSS profile. The other type of aid is merit aid or scholarships, and this is typically based on factors like grades, test scores, class rank, recommendations. This is often awarded automatically when the student is offered admission. So an admission offer may say, congratulations, you've been admitted to our college, and we're going to award you $20,000 per year for 4 years, or a total of $80,000. However, there are sometimes additional applications required. So when your student is applying to college, you want to make sure that you look at the financial aid page of every college's website that your student is applying to make sure you understand exactly what you need to do in order to qualify for the maximum amount of aid. So let's talk first about need-based aid or need-based grants. This is the algebra portion of the evening. Need equals COA minus EFC or SAI. Now I'm going to explain those terms in a minute, but the key thing to remember about need is that's the potential maximum eligibility for need-based aid. It's not the amount of aid that the student is necessarily going to receive. And in fact, in most cases, students receive less aid than what they are potentially eligible for. So let's break down those terms. COA stands for cost of attendance, and that's always made up of 4 elements: tuition and fees, housing and meals, books and supplies, and transportation and other miscellaneous expenses. EFC stands for expected family contribution. And if you look at those words in English, that makes you think that that's what you're going to pay for college. In reality, that's rarely what people end up paying for college. And so a couple of years ago, the FAFSA changed that term. It's no longer the EFC when you're talking about the FAFSA. The FAFSA instead uses the term SAI, or Student Aid Index. And that is really something that doesn't have any inherent meaning for most people, but it's a truer reflection of the fact that estimating these EFCs and SAIs is really just a way of ranking all the students who are applying to college in terms of the economic resources that the student and the family have. So when we're talking about the FAFSA, you want to pay attention to the SAI. When we're talking about the profile, you want to pay attention to the EFC. During this presentation, I'm probably going to use the term EFC for the most part, but just keep in mind that when you're thinking about the FAFSA, it's the SAI. And they both work exactly the same way. The cost of attendance minus the EFC is the potential eligibility for need-based aid based on whichever form you're talking about. An important thing to keep in mind is that college aid policies vary, ranging from colleges that award no need-based aid to colleges that meet full financial need based on the FAFSA SAI or the profile EFC. So if your student has a low EFC, meaning a high eligibility for need-based aid, you probably want to identify colleges that will meet a significant portion of that need with gift aid. We'll talk about that in a minute. Now, people often ask, well, my income is such and such, or I have this much in assets. Will I qualify for need-based aid? And the answer is almost always that it's too complicated to narrow it down to a single number like that. But I want to point out a couple of numbers that can help give you a general sense of who qualifies for most need-based aid. So the median US income for a household of four in 2022 was about $109,000. That means that half of the households made more than that, and half of the households earned less than that. The median wealth for all households in 2021, which includes financial assets, home equity, and retirement, was about $167,000. So typically, it's people who are in the lower half of the economic spectrum in terms of income and or assets who receive the lion's share of need-based aid. People who have higher incomes than that may well qualify. In fact, they often do qualify for some need-based aid, but whether it's enough to make college affordable is often a question mark, and we'll talk about that more. So we said that the EFC or the SAI determines eligibility for need-based aid. A lower EFC means greater eligibility for aid. There are two formulas that are used, one based on information reported on the FAFSA, the other based on information reported on the CSS profile, but they both use the same basic approach, which is to look at the income and assets of the student and the parents. So they're actually doing four separate calculations in the background. They add up the subtotal from each of those calculations, and the combination of all four of those subtotals ends up being the EFC. So a couple of things to point out. For most people, income plays a much bigger role in determining eligibility for need-based aid than assets do. So once you reach a certain minimum level of income, every additional dollar of income adds about 47 cents to the EFC. That means that reduces eligibility for need-based aid by about 47 cents. On the other hand, assets add a maximum of 5 to 5.64%. So once you reach a certain minimum level of assets, each additional dollar of assets adds about a nickel or a nickel and a half to the EFC. People often say, well, what can I do to make myself eligible for more need-based aid? And often the answer is probably not a lot. Most people are not in a position to quit their job for 4 years while their student is in college, and that would have the greatest impact on eligibility for aid. Sometimes there are marginal things that you might do to increase your eligibility from assets, but in order to make a meaningful difference in the cost of college, you really need to do a huge amount of assets. So if you were to be able to shield, for example, $100,000 of assets, which by the way, most people really can't, it would save about $5,000 if you received all of that money in need-based aid. So it certainly could help, but it really is a small portion of the total cost of college when you think about how many colleges cost 60, 70, even $90,000 a year. The other thing I want to point out is that student assets do have a bigger impact on eligibility for aid than parent assets. So if a student has $1,000 in his or her name, that's going to reduce eligibility for aid by $200 to $250. If those assets were in the parent's name, it would reduce eligibility for aid by $50 to $56. One thing that can be done to shield student assets, if a student happens to have some in his or her name, is to put those assets into a student-owned 529. There's a special loophole that treats student-owned 529s as if they were owned by the parents. So instead of being assessed at 20 to 25%, that could be assessed at 5 to 5.64%. Student income is calculated similarly to parent income, but that's usually not a major factor for most traditional high school students. So what is the FAFSA used for? It's used for federal Pell Grants. Those are reserved really for only the very neediest of students. So if family income is greater than $40,000 or $50,000, the likelihood of a Pell Grant is very small. There are some state-based grants that use the FAFSA for eligibility. Once again, those are reserved for the very neediest of students. Federal work study is technically a FAFSA-based need-based aid program. However, most students can get campus jobs even if they're not technically eligible for federal work study, because most colleges do have campus employment opportunities available even for students who don't have financial need. Federal student loans are available to all U.S. residents, citizens, and green card holders, regardless of need. So that's one really important use of the FAFSA. Bill Gates's kids will qualify for federal student loans, so will mine, and so will yours, as long as you file the FAFSA. And at colleges that don't use the CSS profile, the FAFSA may be used to award college-funded gift aid. However, those colleges that don't use the profile tend not to be particularly generous with college-funded need-based aid. That is, they leave a gap between the amount of need that a student has and the amount of aid that is awarded. So what is the profile used for? That's used for awarding college-funded need-based grants, and the most generous need-based aid typically comes from colleges that use the CSS profile. At those colleges, the maximum annual aid based on the FAFSA is about $7,000 to $10,000. The maximum aid based on the profile could be as much as $80,000 to $90,000. So you can see that there's a lot of money at stake potentially for colleges that use the CSS profile. Colleges that use the CSS profile often offer a discount when there are more than one sibling in college at the same time. That used to be the case for the FAFSA also. It was eliminated in 2024, but some profile colleges continue to use that. Now, almost all of the colleges that you might hear about that call themselves full need colleges use the CSS profile. at those colleges, there are a couple of terms that you may hear. Need-blind colleges claim not to consider need in making their admission decisions. Need-aware colleges are full need colleges that may give an admission advantage to students who can pay the full cost of attendance. So sometimes people say, well, maybe I shouldn't file the financial aid forms if it's going to reduce my student's chance of admission. I think that's not a great idea because you probably don't want your student to be admitted to a college that you can't afford. And it really is a very marginal impact. So I think that people worry about that much more than they really need to. Almost all colleges that don't meet full need are need blind. So it's really a very small minority of colleges where that need aware factor is an issue at all. So let's compare the FAFSA and the CSS profile. Common items of income that are considered by the FAFSA start with adjusted gross income from the tax return. Then they add to that, for financial aid purposes, certain items of income that are not subject to tax, but do count in the financial aid formulas. The most common of those are deductible IRA and SEP-type retirement contributions that are reported on the 1040, and then also untaxed interest or pension-type distributions. The most common FAFSA assets are checking and savings accounts, mutual funds and brokerage accounts, real estate other than the primary residence, so that would include investment properties or second homes, family businesses and farms are included, and parent-owned 529s for which the student is the beneficiary. Those are all included in the group of assets that are counted by the FAFSA for the financial aid eligibility. Now, assets are going to be valued at their market value less any debt directly secured by the assets, and certain items are not going to be included, and those include retirement accounts and personal property. The profile looks at all income that the FAFSA looks at, and then in addition to that, it looks at retirement contributions to 401k and 403b accounts. Those are reported on W-2s, not the 1040. They're not included in the FAFSA need analysis, but they are included in the CSS profile calculation. The profile also adds back allowable tax losses and depreciation. So if you own an investment property that reports tax losses, those will be added back. Also, tax losses or depreciation from a small business will be added back. Untaxed Social Security is not included for the FAFSA, but it is included for the CSS profile. And gifts from other people are not included as income for the FAFSA, but they are included as income by colleges that use the CSS profile. So that includes college payments that might be made by a grandparent or other relative. Profile assets include all FAFSA assets, and they also include equity in the family's primary residence. That's the single biggest difference between the FAFSA assets and the profile assets. The profile is also going to look at parent-owned 529s for siblings of the student, and they will also be looking at assets in the name of the student's siblings. Once again, assets are valued at market value, less debt directly securing the asset, and retirement accounts and personal property often are reported as a question on the CSS profile, but they're not included in the primary calculation of eligibility for aid. So I mentioned that the FAFSA had made some changes recently. They were effective for students who graduated in the high school class of 2024. The discount when multiple siblings are enrolled simultaneously was eliminated. In the case of a parent, or in the case where parents are divorced or separated, the determination of which parent provides information on the FAFSA has been changed. And the person who provides information is called the contributing parent. That doesn't mean the parent who's contributing money. It means the parent who's contributing the information on the FAFSA. It used to be that the parent who provided information was the parent with whom the student lived more than 50% of the time. Now it's the parent who contributes the greater share of the student's expenses. That can leave a gray area. It was intended to minimize the amount of shopping that people did to try to find the parent who might provide the greatest eligibility for aid. But there are some judgment calls that may have to be made in determining which parent is the contributing parent. As a result of these changes to the FAFSA, very needy students benefited. So about 500,000 more students are eligible for Pell Grants now than were eligible under the old rules. And overall, about 3/4 of all students using the new rules have a lower SAI, meaning a higher eligibility for aid based on the FAFSA. For both the FAFSA and the profile, there are some special cases that we need to talk about. One of them we mentioned, divorced or separated parents. Now, the FAFSA is going to be looking at the contributing parent only, and if that parent has remarried, they will also be looking at the new spouse. So the FAFSA will be looking at the contributing parent and, if applicable, a new step parent. The profile is going to be looking at both biological parents, and if those parents have remarried, excuse me, they will also be looking at the new spouse's information. So the profile may be looking at the income and assets of as many as 4 different parents and step parents. Now, there is a calculation that takes place in the background at profile colleges that is intended to put the primary burden for college on the biological parents. But that calculation is imperfect, and it's often the case that remarrying is a disadvantage in terms of eligibility for need-based aid. So if you're thinking about remarrying, do it for love, don't do it for financial aid. Another thing to keep in mind, when you report information on the FAFSA, you're going to be reporting income that was earned in the past, but your circumstances might have changed. For example, they might be a loss of a job, a death in the family, divorce, or something like that, high medical expenses. In those cases, what you want to do is to report the information as it actually happened, and then email each college that your student applies to individually and let them know that the information that you reported on the FAFSA or the profile doesn't necessarily reflect your current ability to pay for college. Colleges will review that information and potentially make you eligible for more aid. The discretion in whether to do that is up to the college. But if your circumstances have changed, it certainly makes sense to let them know and ask for them to consider you for more aid. Another point, negotiation. Now, college is not like buying a new car. You're not going to be using the same tactics that you might do when you go to a car dealership. However, if your student is awarded more aid at a college, at college A, but really would prefer to go to college B, you might take college A's aid offer, show it to college B, and ask them if they can award more aid. Tell them that affordability is a consideration in making a final decision. It doesn't always work, but the worst case is that the college will say no. So you're never worse off for asking. As a result of this, early decision is often a disadvantage for financial aid. The reason is that if you apply to a college early decision, what you're doing is you're saying that if the college offers your student admission and they offer enough financial aid to make it affordable for you, then you withdraw your applications from other colleges that the student might have applied to and commit to going to that college. What that means is that you're not going to get competing offers for financial aid. So you're going to have less ability to compare offers to see what the best price might be, or to use those as potentially a tool to try to get a better aid offer from the college. So we said that the profile is, or the FAFSA and the profile are looking at income that was earned in the past. And here's how that timing works. So this is an example for a student who's going to graduate from high school in the class of 2025, a current senior, and enter college the following fall, the fall of 2025. They're going to be looking at income that was earned during calendar year 2023. So you filed your taxes for 2023 in April of 2024. Probably at around this time of the year, your student is applying to college. You'll be able to file the profile at any time after October 1st. Normally, the FAFSA is also available October 1st of every year. This year, because of all the changes, the programming is taking longer for them to implement. So the FAFSA is expected to be available December 1st. But in any event, you're going to file your FAFSA and your profile at approximately the same time that your student is applying to college. That way, colleges can notify you of how much financial aid you might get at about the same time that they notify the student of potential admission. Assets, on the other hand, are valued as of the filing date. So if you're filing in the fall of 2024 for the class of 2025, your assets are going to be valued as of what they are at this point in time. And this gives you a potential planning opportunity. If you know that there are expenses that you need to pay, you may be better off to pay those expenses before you file the FAFSA. So let's say that you're self-employed and you pay estimated taxes. You might want to make those estimated tax payments a little earlier than usual. That way they're not reported as part of your checking or savings accounts. And instead, you might be eligible for a little bit more aid based on slightly lower asset values. So I'm going to show you the dates that will apply for all 4 years of college for current year seniors. We said that for the first year of college, they're going to be looking at income that was earned in 2023. For the second year, it'll be 2024. The third year will be 2025. And the fourth year will be 2026. Now, here's another opportunity for planning at a profile college if you might be eligible for need-based aid and there's an outside party, maybe a grandparent or other relative who wants to help pay for college. So remember, we said that at profile colleges, gifts count as untaxed income. However, the final income year that's going to be looked at for the student's senior year of college is the calendar year that ends December 31st of the student's sophomore year of college. So if that grandparent waits until after January 1st of the student's sophomore year to make those payments, then the final income year has passed and that untaxed income will not impact eligibility for need-based aid. Now, you don't need to worry about this if your student doesn't qualify for aid anyway, or if your student isn't going to a CSS profile college. But if those are the case, then that's a planning opportunity. I'm going to show you the dates that would apply to students who are juniors in high school, sophomores, ninth graders. If you send me an email, which I'll put up at the end of the presentation I'll send you these slides and you can have all these dates as a reference. So we've talked about identifying the student's potential eligibility for need-based aid. If you find that your student does have financial need, what you might want to do, or what you will want to do, is identify colleges that might meet that need. Now, when colleges have a student who has financial need, there are three things that that college might do. They might meet that need with a grant. That's the best thing for you. They might meet some of that need with loans or work study. That's okay, but it's not as good as a grant. Or they might just not meet that need at all. That means that they're gapping the student. There's a gap between the amount of need that the student has and the amount of aid that the college offers. So when you're trying to identify colleges that are going to meet need, what you'd like to do is to find colleges where the average amount of need met with a grant is as high as possible, and the average gap between the need that the student has and the aid that the college offers is as small as possible. So let's look at some examples. The University of Maine meets about 48% of need on average with gift aid, and they leave about a 26% gap. That's really not a great statistic. However, the University of Maine is probably going to be affordable for most Maine residents, but that's because of the lower in-state tuition offered by the University of Maine. On the other hand, University of New Hampshire has similarly poor statistics. They only meet 37% of need with a grant, and they have a 30% gap on average. That means that if your student has financial need, the University of New Hampshire is not going to be a great place to find a college that is going to meet that need. NYU and Ohio Wesleyan meet a higher portion of that need with gift aid, and they have smaller gaps. NYU is still rather expensive for most people. Ohio Wesleyan often might be a somewhat better option. And then at BU and Bowdoin, there is a greater percent of need that's met with gift aid and a smaller gap. And in fact, at Bowdoin, which is kind of the gold standard of how a college might meet financial need, there's no gap. They meet 100% of need, and they meet 97% of that need on average with gift aid. So if your student has high financial need, a college whose aid awarding approach is similar to Bowdoin's is going to be a great choice to find an affordable college. Obviously, it's difficult to get into Bowdoin, so that's another thing you need to consider. But Bowdoin has great financial aid for students that have high financial need. So let's say that your student has financial need and you've identified some colleges that award need-based aid. Will the amount of need-based aid that your student might receive be sufficient to make college affordable? I'm going to show you an example from a couple of years ago at Carleton College in Minnesota. Carleton is one of those rare colleges that meets full financial need. In this example, the cost of attendance was $72,000 and the EFC was $30,000, meaning that for this student at Carleton, there was $42,000 of need. Well, at Carleton, they meet the first $4,500 of need with a loan. They meet the next $2,200 of need with work study. Only after subtracting loan and work study awards from the amount of need is the remaining amount of need met with a grant or gift aid. So in this case, that gift aid is going to be $35,000. You subtract $35,000 from $72,000, and you see that the true net price for 1 year at Carleton is about $37,000. That's about $7,000 more than the EFC. In the subsequent years, that awarding pattern is going to continue, although they're going to increase the amount of loans slightly each year. So at the end of 4 years, the cumulative EFC has been about 120,000. However, the cumulative net price has been 153,000, even though Carleton has met 100% of that financial need, that 168,000 of need. Now remember, Carleton is a very generous college, and this example doesn't include inflation. So the rule of thumb that I use is that if your EFC times 4 plus about $40,000 is not affordable, then need-based aid may not be the answer to your paying for college dilemma. So if need-based aid isn't going to be the answer, how might you afford college? Well, you might identify colleges that award merit aid. To talk about merit aid, we really need to talk first about the business of college. So when people think about college, students and families, they tend to focus on the acceptance rate. The acceptance rate is the percent of students who apply to a college and are offered admission at that college. So at Harvard, the acceptance rate is about 3%. At Northeastern, it's 6. BU is about 11. Muhlenberg, Ohio Wesleyan, and University of Denver are 50, 60, 70% or more. Now, colleges, of course, pay a lot of attention to the acceptance rate, but they also pay attention to another critical number, which is the yield rate. The yield rate is the percent of students who were offered admission at a college in the spring and end up enrolling at that college in the fall. At Harvard, more than 4 out of 5 students who are offered admission end up enrolling at Harvard. At Claremont, McKenna, and Northeastern, about half do. But at Muhlenberg, Ohio Wesleyan, and University of Denver, 15% or fewer students end up yielding at those colleges. And when that yield number gets to be low in the 20s or less, colleges really worry about having enough students who are going to be attending their college and paying some portion of the expenses at that college to help the college make ends meet and keep the lights on. So what do colleges do when they're worried about yield? They discount their price with financial aid in order to compete for yield against other colleges. So this third column shows the percent of students who received college-funded gift aid at these various colleges. And the fourth column shows the percent of students who received merit aid. Merit aid is based on academics, and it is not based on need. So this fourth column shows the percent of students who had no financial need but received merit aid from the college. You can see at Harvard, no students got merit aid, and relatively few got merit aid at Claremont, McKenna, Northeastern, or BU. But a significant portion of students got merit aid at Arizona State, Muhlenberg, and Ohio Wesleyan. So when that percent of students who receive college-funded gift aid gets relatively high, 80% or above, that's a sign that that college is likely to be using merit aid as part of its approach to awarding aid to students. And if need-based aid isn't going to make college affordable for your student, maybe merit aid will. So let's talk more about merit aid. So we said that merit aid is typically called a scholarship. The factors that go into it are things like GPA, class rank, and test scores. It's most prevalent at private colleges, but more and more public colleges are using merit aid now too. And here's a key point. The highest awards go to the strongest students relative to the school's other applicants. What that means is that you're probably going to get your highest merit aid offers at colleges you might consider your safety schools. So your safety schools for admission may well be your safety schools for financial reasons also. And as we said, college aid policies vary, ranging from colleges that use no merit aid to colleges that use significant amount of merit aid. So I want to show you an example of how some colleges awarded merit aid. These are from before the pandemic when SAT scores were more universally used. And what you can see is that all three of these colleges pegged their highest merit award fairly close to the 75th percentile of SAT scores. What that means is that the top 25% of students at these colleges were the students who got the highest merit aid offers. And at each of these schools, they pegged the lower merit awards to close to the 25th percentile. So the lowest 25% of students ended up getting some of those lower merit aid offers at each of these schools. It turns out that you can make a generalization from this, which is when a college uses merit aid, the best chances for the largest awards are when you're above the college's 75th percentile. If a college uses merit aid, the awards may phase out when you get to about the college's 25th percentile. However, at colleges that compete aggressively for students, they may award merit aid to just about everyone to whom they offer admission. So let's see some examples. At Gettysburg College in Pennsylvania, 95% of the students receive college-funded gift aid. It might be need-based aid or it might be merit aid, but the key point at Gettysburg is that only 5% of the students are receiving or are paying the full price there. And at Lewis and Clark College in Oregon, 100% of the students are getting some discount from the cost of attendance. Now, when that percent of students receiving college-funded gift aid is over 65 or 70%, it's pretty likely that the college is using merit aid at least as part of how it awards its financial aid. And when that percent gets over 80%, it's highly likely that the college uses merit aid. And as you can see here, there are a significant number of colleges where 90% or more of the students receive college-funded gift aid. So if you're wondering where you might get merit aid, one thing you can do is to compare your students' SAT scores with a database to see where your student might rank in the top 25 or 50% of students. One source for this is US News and World Report. Now, if there was a silver lining in the pandemic, it was that many colleges went test optional. So even if your student doesn't have SAT scores, what I often do is use a proxy SAT that's consistent with the student's transcript to identify colleges where the student might get merit aid. If you're not confident about how to generate a proxy SAT, your student's school counselor could probably help you to give you kind of an SAT that's consistent with the student's transcript. So in this example, I'm looking at a student with an 1180 SAT that's equivalent to an ACT of about 24. And you can see that an 1180 SAT is right in the middle of the range of SAT scores of students at Shenandoah University. So that means that this student is likely going to be in the top half of the applicants there and probably is going to be eligible for one of the higher merit awards that Shenandoah might offer. And if you look at other colleges with SAT scores in that similar range, you can identify other colleges where your student might be eligible for one of the merit awards that these colleges might offer. Another way to get information on merit aid is to look on what's called the common data set. Now, the common data set is a set of very dense statistics that colleges report to places like US News and the College Board. And it's very common, probably about 3/4 of colleges publish these common data sets on their websites. So if you're interested in finding out about merit aid, you can Google the college name and then the words common data set. I did that for Hofstra University on Long Island in New York. And when you find the common data set, you can go to section A, subsection 2A, and then look for data points N and O. Data point N shows the number of first-year students who received college-funded gift aid without having financial need. That's another way of saying merit aid. And at Hofstra, that was 372 students, or about 25% of all the students there. And the average amount of merit aid was about 24,000. Now, Hofstra's starting cost is in the mid 70,000 range. So if your student gets a typical merit award there, their ending cost after gift aid might be in the $50,000 to $55,000 range. So if that's going to be affordable for you, that might be an option for your student to think about. So let me show you some examples of how colleges use merit aid. And what I want to key in on is that percent of students receiving college-funded gift aid. That's the last row in this data set. So at BU, only about half of students receive college-funded gift aid. And if you look up above, you can see that only 7% of students received a merit aid offer without having financial need. That means that BU is not going to be the greatest place to look for merit aid. You're more likely to end up paying the full price at BU. But at colleges like Macalester, Dickinson, Fordham, and the College of Worcester, those colleges aid 80% or more of all of their students, and their average merit aid awards range from $20,000 to almost $40,000 a year. So these are colleges where a student might get a significant merit aid offer. It's a little tougher at some of the public colleges because their data is mixed between in and out of state residents, but you can still get these general directional senses. So at Berkeley and University of Maryland, where more than 50% of the students pay the full price, you're very unlikely to get an offer of merit aid. And in fact, you're probably unlikely to get any need-based aid at these schools either. So if your student is applying to Berkeley or University of Maryland, be prepared to pay the full price. But at the University of Rhode Island, Arizona State, and Orono, a significant portion of students receive merit aid. So these colleges are colleges where you might get a discount on the price with merit aid. So here's a summary. If you're looking for merit aid, the best chances for it are when a college has a relatively high admit rate, a relatively low yield rate, a high percent of students who receive college-funded gift aid, and the applicant is strong relative to the other applicants at that school. So here's a summary of how colleges award need and merit-based aid. And I've broken colleges down into 4 groups, which I call the elite, the near elite, the mid-market, and other. The elite and near elite are colleges that you've probably heard of: Stanford, Amherst, Bowdoin, Pitzer, Carleton. These colleges tend to be very generous with need-based aid, and they often meet full need with a significant portion of it being met with gift aid. These colleges tend to use very little or no merit aid. But at the mid-market and other colleges, they're often weaker in their need-based aid awarding, but they often use significant amounts of merit aid. And as you can see, about 100 to maybe 150 colleges are in that elite to near elite category. There are over 2,000 colleges in the mid-market and other category. So there are colleges that are dying to award your student merit aid. The trick is to identify them and apply to them. So we've talked about need-based aid, we've talked about merit aid. Now here's a tool that you can use to estimate your net price at various colleges, and that is to use a net price calculator. Net price calculators are required by law. Every college has to have one, and the law says that net price calculators should show you your cost of attendance, an estimate of the total gift aid, and the net price. Now, even though colleges are required to have net price calculators, they are not required to have good ones. Here's how you can tell the difference. If a net price calculator is super easy to use, it has 5 or 6 questions, takes 10 or 15 seconds, it probably stinks. If it has a lot of questions, kind of makes you tear your hair out, it's probably asking for enough information to give you a more reliable estimate. Now, don't get discouraged when you're using net price calculators because you'll find that the types of questions that are asked are pretty consistent. They're used over and over again. So the more you use them, the easier they're going to be for you to use. And always remember, the net price is the cost of attendance minus the gift aid. So if you use net price calculators, you're going to be able to compare the costs of colleges on a net price basis side by side so that you can make a true apples to apples college cost comparison. And here's where I want to pause for a minute because we've been talking about dollars and cents all evening. But you also want to be thinking about some of the other factors that go into choosing a good college. So ideally, you want to find a college where your student is going to thrive, to find the academic courses that are going to interest them and that they want to major in. So I'm not advocating that you find the cheapest possible college. What I am advocating is that you find a college where you're very confident that it will be affordable for you and your student. And we'll talk about how to define that in just a minute. But first, I want to show you some examples of a student with an EFC of 15,000 and B minus to B grades. So I've used several net price calculators to estimate their 1-year cost. At Roger Williams, the beginning cost is 64,000. This student is likely to get a merit aid offer of about 21,000 and an additional $1,000 in need-based aid, resulting in a net price of about 42,000. At Shenandoah, the net price looks like about 34,000. At Wheaton in Massachusetts, it's about 30,000. Orono is 29,000. Bowdoin is great. It's 17,000. That's only $2,000 more than this student's EFC. And at USM, living at home and commuting to college, this student's net price is about 15,000. Now, a couple of things to point out. First of all, I know that USM commuting from home is not the same experience as going away to college and living in the dorm. But I put this example in to remind people that there is an affordable path to college for everyone. It may not be the college that you've dreamed about, but there is an affordable path, and far better to compromise on the 4 years of college than to find yourself saddled with unsustainable debt for 10, 20, 30 years or more after college. The other thing to point out is that a B minus student is probably not going to get into Bowdoin. So even though Bowdoin has a great net price, you've got to be a little realistic about the student's prospects for admission when you're thinking about where the student might apply. Okay, so we're almost done. I want to talk now about paying the net price. Now, a lot of people, when they think about aid and the cost of college, think, okay, well, we're going to apply for scholarships and use that to help us pay for the cost of college. The reliability of that approach is probably minimal because the vast majority of gift aid to pay for college comes from colleges themselves. So if you apply for these other scholarships, you might get $500 or $1,000 or $2,000. And that's great, better in your pocket than the colleges. But $1,000 or $2,000 is not going to go very far when the cost of college might be $60,000, $80,000, or $90,000. So when you're thinking about the cost of college, make sure you plan on what the net price is going to be after college funded aid. Then if you get any outside scholarships, that will be a bonus. So the net price is going to be paid from income that's earned over time. What do I mean by that? Well, there are three types of income. One of them is prior income, money that was earned in the past and saved. The next is current income, money that's earned during the college years and can be used for college expenses. And then the final one is future income, money that's earned after college and is used to repay the debt that you took out to pay for college. And using future income to repay debt is always the most expensive way to pay for college. So let's go back to that award letter we looked at the beginning of the evening. We remember that that net price was $34,865. We've got to remember that the cost of college is going to be for 4 years. And there are a couple of important questions we need to ask. One, how much will costs increase? And is that aid automatically renewable? And what are the terms? If you get a financial aid offer from a college and it's not crystal clear whether the aid is renewable and how to renew it, make sure you find out that answer in writing before your student commits to that college. Now, typically, merit aid is renewable over 4 years as long as the student maintains a reasonable GPA or minimum GPA. And need-based aid is typically renewable as long as your income and assets remain pretty consistent over the course of the college years. But make sure you're absolutely certain what's required to renew aid. So for this example, we're going to assume that costs increase 2% a year, that aid is renewable and constant for 4 years, and that the student has $2,000 in savings and the parents have $25,000 in savings available for college. So how do we pay for this degree? Well, at 2% inflation, that $35,000 a year means that the degree is going to cost about $144,000. I'm going to look first to the student. So this student was offered typically a work-study award of about $2,500 per year. In addition, I'm going to include federal student loans. If you're going to be borrowing for college, federal student loans are always the first place to look because they're automatically available, the interest rate is reasonable for an unsecured loan, and there are some protections for the borrower if he or she runs into trouble after college. But there's a limit to how much you can borrow in federal student loans. And that limit is $5,500 in year 1, $6,500 in year 2, and then $7,500 each in years 3 and 4. So that's a total of $27,000 that the student can borrow for 4 years of college. Next, we said the student had $2,000 in savings. I'm going to use that first because remember, assets in the student's name raise the EFC more than assets in the parent's name. So if I use that first, maybe there's going to be a little bit more eligibility for aid in years 2, 3, and 4. After that, I'm going to assume that the student gets a summer job each year before college. And if a student makes $4,000 or $5,000 in a summer job, they should be able to pay taxes, go to the beach and the movies, but they can also save $2,500 to use toward tuition. At this point, the student resources are done. So now we've got to start looking at the parent resources. Now, these parents looked at their monthly budget and they decide that they can pay $375 a month toward the cost of college during the college years. $375 a month times 12 months in a year is $4,500 per year. Next, we're going to assume that the parents use $18,000 of their savings and fully pay for year one. In year two, they're going to use the remaining $7,000 of their savings. But at this point, both the student and the parent resources are gone. Now, the only way to pay for additional college is for there to be additional borrowing. And I always consider additional borrowing beyond the $27,000 in federal student loans to be a parent responsibility, because either the parents are going to need to borrow that money directly or they're going to need to co-sign for a student loan. In this example, the parents are going to need to borrow $12,000 to pay the balance of year two, about $19,000 to pay for year three, and $20,000 to pay for year four. So at the end of 4 years, we have fully paid for this $144,000 degree using prior income, current income, and future income. In this example, the student debt is $27,000 and the parent debt is $52,000. Is that a good idea? Well, we don't know yet. First, we've got to understand what are the loans going to cost. It turns out that federal student loans currently cost 6.5% interest. Parent loans are about 9% interest, and you repay both of these loans over 10 years, beginning 6 months after the student graduates. In addition, you've got to remember that the interest clock starts ticking immediately, but they know that you're going to continue to borrow during the 4 years of college. So the interest that builds up during the college years is going to be added to the beginning balance of the loan. In the case of the student, at current interest rates, about $4,600 of interest is going to build up during the 4 years of college. That will be added to the beginning balance of the loan, which was 27, meaning that when the student goes into repayment, the balance is $31,622. Now, for every $1,000 of student debt, the student is going to have to pay back $136 per year for 10 years. So if you multiply 31.622 by 136, you see that the student has to pay back about $4,300 per year for 10 years to pay off that loan. The parents who borrowed $52,000 are going to have almost $10,000 of interest that accumulates. They're going to need to pay back about $9,400 per year for 10 years. So that's how much the debt is going to cost. Is that a reasonable amount? Well, my rule of thumb for student debt is that payments for education debt shouldn't exceed about 10% of the student's gross income after college. So in this example, where the student borrowed $27,000, he or she is going to be paying $4,300 a year. That means that the student needs to get a job that pays about $43,000 a year in order to have 90% of their income available for taxes, rent, and what I call the 3 Gs: gas, groceries, and good times. And the good news is that the average new college graduate makes about $40,000 to $50,000. So it's probably not an unreasonable trade-off for the benefit that the student gets out of a college degree for the student to borrow that $27,000. For the parents, it's more complicated because they've got to consider their ongoing obligations, college for other children, and retirement. And in this case, I see a big red flag because when we were talking with the parents, they said they could afford $375 a month or $4,500 a year to pay for college out of their ongoing income. So my question to them is going to be, what makes you think that after college, you can all of a sudden go from $4,500 a year to $9,400 a year? So to me, this does not look like an affordable college for this family. So a lot of people wonder, how does everyone else do it? And the answer is exactly the way I've described to you tonight. So you start with the cost of attendance, you subtract the amount of gift aid, the grants and scholarships, and over the course of 4 years, that's the true cost of a college degree. Next, you look at the resources that are available to pay that price. I think every student starts with about $47,000 in federal student loan eligibility, work-study earnings, and summer job earnings. So the big question is what the parents can afford out of their savings and their income during the college years. If those sources of income and savings are not enough to pay for college, then the only way to fill that gap is for the parents to take on more debt or for the family to find a college with a lower net price. So I think that every family should be thinking in terms of what I call their zone of affordability and looking at the resources in a different way. If you make a grid of 6 boxes, 3 for the parents and 3 for the student, showing savings, current income, and debt, then add all of those up, excluding parent debt. That's what I consider your default zone of affordability. That's the maximum amount you can pay for 4 years of college without the parents taking on any parent debt. Now, parents may choose to take on some debt, but if they do, I want them to be fully aware of it and very confident that any debt they take on is something that they can afford without jeopardizing their other financial goals, retirement, etc. So once you identify those 5 cells, add them all together to get your zone of affordability, you can identify colleges whose 4-year cost of a degree match that price or less. And those are the colleges that fall within your zone of affordability. So this is kind of heavy stuff. I think it's good to try to keep it in perspective. And I often think about this in terms of the stages of grief. Well, that's kind of a bummer, but I'd much rather have people go through the stages of grief before their college or before their student takes on unsustainable debt rather than afterwards. Another thing to remember, college is important, but it's not the goal. The goal is to set the student up for success after college in a way that neither the student nor the parents are burdened by excessive debt. Another way to keep it in perspective, the CEO of Starbucks, or the guy who founded Starbucks, went to Northern Michigan University. The head of Walt Disney Company went to Ithaca College, and the CEO of Hershey Foods went to Shippensburg University in Pennsylvania. Now, these are all fine colleges, but what you'll notice is they're not the Ivy Leagues. They're not the big brand names that people tend to think about most often. And these people have done very well in life without going to some of those big brand name colleges. And finally, you can think about the earnings after college and compare that to the net price. So the typical mid-career earnings for a graduate of Boston College are only about $1,000 a year more than the typical graduate of Loyola University in Maryland. But Boston College, on average, costs about $108,000 more for a 4-year degree than Loyola. So that means that this student is going to have to work for 108 years to make up the final difference between Boston College and Loyola. And I don't know about you, but working for 108 years is not part of my retirement plan. So, how do you find financial safeties? Well, one way is to do the steps that we've talked about tonight. And that's a way to kind of identify colleges that are likely to match your student's profile in terms of eligibility for need and merit aid. Kind of a shortcut approach is to see the list of colleges the student is applying to with colleges that take different approaches to how they award aid. So I think every student should apply to one or two public colleges in his or her home state. You might look at an out-of-state public flagship. But what also turns out often to be the case is that out-of-state secondary publics are often significantly less. So Worcester State, a public college in Worcester, Mass, is $23,000 a year less than UMass Amherst. If your student has high financial need, some of those highly selective private colleges may be a good match. And if you're looking for merit aid, you might want to look at this website run by the Colleges That Change Lives. This is a group of about 40 or 50 colleges, and they often have great outcomes and often use significant amounts of merit aid. And remember, commuting to your local college is always a way to find an affordable college. It may not be the first choice, but far better than taking on unsustainable debt. So I'm going to leave you, if you're from Maine, with a couple of tips. If you live in Maine and you contribute $1,000 a year to a 529 account run by the state of Maine, the state will match $300 per year. So even if your student is a junior or senior in high school, if you save $1,000 a year in that 529, you could get $1,000 or more of free money to help pay for college. It's not going to be the total answer, but $1,000 is better in your pocket than someone else's. So I've got a website with some resources that may be helpful for you as you're thinking about financial aid and college affordability. I'm happy to email these slides to anyone who sends me an email. And with that, I'm going to turn off the recording.